The air in the Appalachian high country was already thick and cold, but it was the silent terror clinging to Alara that truly chilled her to the bone. She was a ghost in a borrowed life, running from a betrayal that had ripped her career, her savings, and her faith in humanity.
Just get through
to
the
shreds.
storm.
Her battered sedan,
Lara.
christened Exile in her more cynical moments, sputtered up the muddy track toward the isolated cabin she'd rented, a place advertised as rustic retreat, but looked more like prime location for a gothic horror. A blizzard was coming. The weather reports had been insistent, but Alara had pushed on, driven by the desperate need to put distance between herself and the city, the whispers, and the ruinous paper trail her ex-fiancé had left for her to clean up. "Just get through the storm, Lara," she murmured to herself, the engine whining in protest. "Then you can start over." The cabin finally appeared, a dark, squat silhouette against the bruised charcoal sky, surrounded by a forest so dense it seemed to swallow the last traces of daylight. She cut the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the frantic rush of the wind picking up speed. It was the kind of silence that pressed in, heavy and alive. Alara grabbed her duffel bag, the only physical remnant of her old life she cared about, and stepped out. The first fat flakes of snow began to drift down, soft as ash, then quickly turned into a blinding, horizontal assault. She struggled with the ancient lock on the cabin door, her fingers numb inside her threadbare gloves. Just as she finally pushed the door inward, a sound sliced through the mounting wind. A low, ragged whine that was too deep for a coyote and too pained for any domestic dog. She froze. It sounded close, painfully close. Alara was not brave. She was pragmatic, wounded, and deeply tired. Her first instinct was to slam the door, lock out the wild world, and pretend she hadn't heard it. But the sound came again. A desperate, shuddering gasp followed by a wet cough. It was the sound of something suffering, maybe dying, and against all reason, against the cautionary voice honed by years of disappointment, she found herself turning back. She fumbled in the trunk, pulling out a heavy-duty flashlight. Its beam was weak and wavering in the swirling snow, illuminating a small patch of the deep woods near the edge of the property. "Hello?" Her voice was thin, swallowed by the storm. She sounded ridiculous. What did she expect to find? A hiker? She took 3 tentative steps toward the woods, following the sound of intermittent, labored breathing. The snow was already reaching her ankles. And then she saw him. Not a hiker, not a dog. It was a wolf. A massive, shaggy pelted beast, easily 3 feet high at the shoulder, its fur the color of wet obsidian. It was crumpled beneath a thicket of pines, its breathing shallow and hitching. But it wasn't just resting. A dark stain bloomed across its flank, stark against the black fur and the white snow, spreading outward and glistening wetly. It had been shot or gored, and it was bleeding out. Ilara's breath hitched. Fear was a cold, sharp blade, yet it was quickly overlaid by a strange, overwhelming surge of primal pity. This creature was immense, terrifying, yet utterly helpless. Its eyes, when they flickered open, catching the beam of her light, were a startling, intense amber, focused on her with an intelligent, almost human clarity that sent a shiver down her spine. There was no feral rage, only pain and a deep, weary resignation. As she stared, mesmerized by the intensity of those eyes, the wolf shifted, trying to rise, only to collapse with another pained whine. It was clearly disoriented, weakened by blood loss, and would not last the night in this storm. A voice in her head screamed, "Go inside, call the rangers. It's dangerous. It's a wild animal." But the image of those amber eyes, so filled with ancient sorrow, rooted her to the spot. She knew the feeling of being abandoned and broken, left to fade in the cold. It was a kinship she didn't want to admit. "Okay," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, the sound absurdly loud in the wind. "Okay, I'm not going to hurt you." She carefully set her flashlight down so the beam was aimed at the wound, then took off her gloves. The wound looked clean, perhaps a rifle shot, deep but maybe not instantly fatal. She backed away toward the cabin, found the first aid kit, and pulled out the only things that might help: a thick, clean blanket she'd packed, a roll of medical gauze, and a powerful antiseptic spray, the kind meant for livestock. When she returned, the wolf was still there, but its breathing was even more labored. It lifted its massive head as she approached, a low, warning rumble vibrating in its chest. "I'm just going to cover the bleeding," she promised, speaking softly, calmly, as if to a skittish house pet. "You have to let me." She slowly knelt in the snow beside the immense creature. The fur felt coarse and vital beneath her fingers as she carefully wrapped the blanket around its middle, applying firm pressure to the worst of the injury. The wolf watched her the entire time, its gaze unblinking. It could easily tear her throat out with a single snap, yet it allowed her touch, its pain seemingly overriding its wild nature. It was an intimacy both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. As she worked, gently cleaning the area and trying to slow the flow of blood with the gauze, Ilara noticed the profoundly unsettling depth of the wolf's distress. Its breathing was too rapid. She realized she needed to check its temperature, an impossible task. She reached out, hesitantly, and placed her hand flat against the wolf's neck, just behind its massive head. The fur was thick, but beneath it, the skin was radiating heat. It was burning up. She expected the creature to snap, but instead the wolf leaned slightly into her touch, a small, involuntary movement of seeking comfort. The massive head rested heavily on the floor, the amber eyes fluttering closed again. It was this tiny, unguarded moment of vulnerability that broke Ilara's careful emotional barrier. This was not just a creature, it was a soul in agony. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't realized she still possessed. "You're going to be all right. Just hold on." She finished the dressing, and then, emboldened by the wolf's stillness, poured the bowl of water onto the snow, mixing in the crushed antibiotics and a strong sedative she also carried for emergencies. She carefully nudged the bowl toward the wolf's muzzle. This time, the wolf drank, long and deeply, licking the bowl clean. Ilara sat back, wiping the sweat from her brow. She hadn't been this focused, this purposeful since before her life had imploded. The fear was still a constant, but it was being slowly replaced by the sharp, intense responsibility of care. She settled on the floor of the porch, unwilling to leave the creature alone, and watched the snow fall. It was during this silent vigil, just before the first faint glow of dawn, that she saw the silver cuff again. It wasn't a tracker, she now saw it clearly. It was a thick, highly polished band, etched with strange, swirling symbols, half buried in the wolf's thick wrist fur. It looked ancient, almost ritualistic, and it was far too large and intricate to be a simple piece of human jewelry. She dismissed it instantly. Hunters used tracking devices. Maybe it was an escapee from a reserve. Whatever the explanation, the animal was fading. The storm raged now, a blinding white wall. "You're going to be heavy," she sighed, rubbing her own arms for warmth, her breath misting. The thought of leaving it was impossible. She had to move it, at least into the shelter of the porch. She carefully checked the wound one last time. The bleeding had slowed to a manageable seep. She took a deep breath, wrapped her arms around the wolf's immense neck, and hauled. The exertion was extreme, burning through her tired muscles. But the wolf helped too, struggling to put its weight on its front legs, allowing her to half drag, half carry it to the small enclosed porch of the cabin. Once inside the meager shelter, on a bed of old rags she'd found in a dusty box, the wolf finally rested its head and let out a long, shuddering sigh. The amber eyes met hers one last time before they slipped closed. Ilara stood over the sleeping beast, her body aching, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was miles from civilization, alone with an impossibly large, wounded predator that was now temporarily her patient. The air on the porch suddenly felt charged with a strange, dark energy. It was only then, as she wiped a streak of its dark blood from her glove, that she allowed herself to feel the full, unsettling weight of the impossible decision she had just made. This was not a rescue. It felt like a trap. The storm howled its agreement, sealing her in with her dangerous, mysterious charge. Her broken past felt distant, eclipsed by the immediate, life-altering mystery that now lay bleeding on her porch. The man who had rescued her in the storm, the one who had shattered her heart and sent her fleeing to this mountain wilderness, hadn't been half as dangerous as the silent, sleeping thing outside her door. She locked the inner cabin door and leaned against it, listening to the muffled, heavy breathing from the...
Alara's breath hitched. His face was rugged, set in sharp, angular lines, currently pale beneath a dusting of dark stubble. But it was his eyes that seized her. They were the same intense, piercing amber she had stared into for hours, clear now, sharp, and undeniably human. They locked onto hers with the same intelligent, weary resignation she'd seen in the eyes of the wounded wolf. He straightened, a slow, agonizing movement that betrayed the severity of his injury. He pressed a hand to his side, and Alara watched in morbid fascination as fresh blood immediately stained his fingers. The wound was real. The connection was unavoidable. The man took a hesitant step toward her, then stopped, his expression tightening into a mask of grim frustration, as if fighting an internal battle. "The jacket," Alara whispered, the word barely audible above the light rustle of the melting snow dripping from the eaves. She held it out, a peace offering, a test. He didn't move to take it. Instead, his gaze swept from the jacket to the dry, melted patch on the porch floor, then back to her face. A muscle worked in his jaw. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was a low, rough rumble, like stones shifting, laced with pain and a hint of something deeper, more guttural. It was a statement of fact, not a question. "Neither should you," she retorted, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "You're bleeding. You need a doctor." He gave a harsh, humorless laugh that ended in a cough. "A doctor can't help me." "That's nonsense. You've got a bad wound. You need stitches and antibiotics," Alara insisted, stepping fully onto the porch, clutching the jacket tighter. "Look, I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, or why you were naked in the middle of a blizzard, but I have a cabin and supplies. You can collapse on my couch, or you can bleed out in the snow. Your choice." The man hesitated, his amber eyes analyzing her, searching for the trap, the fear, the judgment. He seemed caught between a desperate need for sanctuary and a fierce, ingrained desire for solitude. Finally, he nodded, a minuscule motion. "The cabin, and the door stays locked, against everyone." "Deal," Alara said, her hand already reaching for the latch. "But no more secrets about the silver bracelets, all right?" His gaze sharpened to a lethal point, instantly erasing the look of vulnerability. The quick flash of pure, cold alertness sent a tremor of pure fear through her, reminding her that she was dealing with something profoundly dangerous. He hadn't just been a wolf, he was a predator. "You saw nothing," he stated, his voice now a low command that brooked no argument. Alara swallowed hard, but held her ground. "I saw a wounded animal, and I helped it. I have a right to be curious, especially since that animal seems to have left its jacket and turned into you." She knew she was pushing too hard, but the fear of the unknown was less paralyzing than the need to understand. She was tired of feeling helpless and deceived. He started walking toward her then, a slow, deliberate march across the snow. Each step was an obvious effort, but his eyes never left hers. There was a raw, captivating intensity about him, a coiled power even in his debilitated state. When he reached the porch, she stepped aside. He paused at the doorway, looming over her. She was forced to crane her neck to meet his gaze. She offered the jacket again. This time, he took it, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting contact that sent a strange jolt of heat up her arm. "My name is Alara," she offered. He pulled the jacket around his shoulders, ignoring the bloodstain, using it more like a shield than a garment. He didn't offer his name. He simply stepped inside, moving with the heavy, cautious grace of a caged animal. The next few hours were a blurred mix of medical urgency and unnerving proximity. Alara insisted he lie down on the cabin's threadbare couch near the fireplace. The wound was just as she had feared, a deep, ragged gash on his side that looked like the work of a bullet or perhaps a large blade. She forced him to drink the rest of the antibiotic mix and a couple of stronger painkillers. She cleaned the wound thoroughly, her hands working with a professional detachment she didn't feel, trying to ignore the heat radiating from his skin and the sharp intake of his breath every time she touched him. He lay still, his body tense, watching every move she made. "It needs stitches," she finally confirmed, stepping back. "No stitches," he ground out, his jaw tight. "Look, I'm not a vet, but I can tell you that gash won't close on its own without scarring badly and probably getting infected." He closed his eyes, breathing slowly. "It will close." "How can you be so sure? Unless you—" She trailed off, suddenly remembering the impossible speed of the wolf's exit and the immediate arrival of the man. "Unless you heal faster than a normal person." He opened his eyes, the amber intense. He didn't confirm or deny, simply fixing her with a steady look that was both threatening and deeply weary. He was inviting her to connect the dots, offering a breadcrumb of truth wrapped in a blanket of danger. She felt the thrill of the chase. The mystery she'd sought in the solitude had found her. She sat on the floor beside the couch, staring into the flickering firelight. She said, "You owe me an explanation," finally, her voice soft. He remained silent for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, his breathing eventually evening out into a heavy, drug-induced slumber. Just as Alara thought he was completely gone, he mumbled a single, gravelly word, "Kael." Alara leaned in. "What?" "Kael," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "My name is Kael." She smiled faintly, a genuine, warm smile she hadn't felt in ages. She finally had a name for the impossibly wounded man who shared a secret with a magnificent black wolf. Kael. She watched him sleep, the rise and fall of his chest slow and deep. The air in the small cabin was thick with the scent of pine, smokewood, and a powerful earthy musk that she recognized instinctively from the wolf. She was exhausted, but a new resolve was blooming inside her. She hadn't run all this way to find an ordinary escape. She had run towards a fate she couldn't outrun. As she drifted towards sleep, leaning against the hearth, she looked down at the blood-stained floorboards on the porch. The melted snow patch was still warm. The memory of the immense, suffering wolf was vivid, but the sight of the vulnerable, silent man sleeping feet away was infinitely more compelling. This was more than an unlikely meeting. It was the start of an entanglement written in blood and destiny. Kael was hiding a deep wound and a profound secret, and Alara found herself aching to know both. Kael's recovery was jarringly swift. When Alara woke, the fire had dwindled to embers, and Kael was gone from the couch. Panic flared instantly, but before she could spring up, she heard the rhythmic thud of an axe outside. She rushed to the window. Kael was standing in the yard, despite the freezing temperature and the fresh wound, methodically splitting logs with powerful, controlled swings. He was still wearing the black jacket she had given him, now zippered up, and the deep crimson stain from the previous night was already significantly faded, almost brownish. He moved with a stiff, guarded grace, but the weakness of the night before was mostly gone. He was healing, just as he had promised, faster than any human could. When he finally looked up, catching her eye through the pane of glass, there was a flash of something unreadable, maybe annoyance at being watched or reluctant recognition. Alara opened the door, letting a blast of frigid air into the warm cabin. "What are you doing, Kael? You have a gunshot wound. Rest." He stopped the axe mid-swing, letting it rest against the chopping block. "I don't rest well, and the cabin's supply is low." His voice was clearer now, losing the ragged edge of pain. "I'm paying you to recuperate, not chop wood for me," she countered, folding her arms. He gave her a long, level look that was both challenging and oddly intimate. "You're not paying me anything, Alara. You saved my life. I'll replace the wood. I need to move." She stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. You need a shower, fresh bandages, and maybe some sense knocked into you. That wound is deep. He walked toward her, picking up a heavy stack of wood with disconcerting ease. Air around him seemed to thicken, charged with an elemental energy that made her scalp prick. Up close, the intensity of his amber eyes was overwhelming. They seemed to hold the secrets of the deep forest, ancient and untamed. He had to leave tonight, he stated, dropping the wood by the hearth. Tonight? Kael, you can barely stand straight. You can't go out there again. I have to. They will be looking for me. They? Who? His face immediately shut down, the guarded wall snapping back into place. People who don't believe in second chances. People who would hurt you if they knew you helped me. The subtle warning sent a chill through her, sharper than the cold air. This wasn't just a wounded man. This was a man running from a powerful, dangerous faction. Look, Alara said, dropping her demanding tone, adopting the low, soothing voice she'd used on the wolf. I don't know what you are, or who they are, but I know pain, and I know betrayal. I'm hiding here for my own reasons, trying to put distance between me and a situation that almost ruined me. I'm not a hero, Kael. I'm just trying to stay afloat, and right now, helping you feels like the most real thing I've done in months. I hadn't meant to reveal so much, but the words tumbled out, driven by the intense, shared solitude of the cabin. Kael's expression softened almost imperceptibly, his eyes lingering on her face. They seemed to hold the secrets of deep forest, ancient and untamed. He finally stared at the ground for a long moment, then back at her. The intense gaze held sympathy, but also a deep understanding of loss that went beyond mere human experience. I didn't choose to be running, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I made a choice years ago, a bad one. Now I carry the weight of that. The curse? She ventured, remembering the silver cuff. Kael flinched, a sharp physical reaction. He didn't. Alara felt a sudden, fierce surge of protectiveness. She had saved his life, and now she would protect his secret. The fear was still present, but it was being eclipsed by a powerful sense of purpose. She was no longer running from life. She was fighting for it. Tell me what to do, she said, her voice clear and strong. I won't let them find you. Kael turned, the intensity in his eyes blazing with reluctant hope. He walked to her, slowly, deliberately, until he was standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached up, his large, rough hand gently cupping her jaw. You are reckless, human, he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. But you are the first light I've felt in years. The touch was electric, a slow burn ignition of the tension that had been building between them since the storm. It was a promise, a confession, and a desperate plea all rolled into one. He was acknowledging the destined, impossible connection between the wounded hero and the broken heroine. I need to prepare, he continued, dropping his hand, the moment broken by necessity. The cabin is too open. I have to be secured before sunset tomorrow. The sedative I drank yesterday helped, but I cannot risk hurting you when the full moon rises. Secured? How? I need a cellar or a root room, something solid, underground that can be locked. Do you have one? Alara frowned. There's an old storm cellar under the kitchen floor. The lock is rusty, though. It might be damp. Show me, Kael ordered. He followed her, moving with renewed urgency, his pain pushed aside by the pressing fear of the approaching change. They located the cellar door hidden beneath a rug. It was heavy, made of solid wood, sealed by a thick metal slide bolt. Kael examined the bolt, running his scarred fingers over the rust. This won't hold the shift, not when the fever hits, but if you reinforce it, and I take a heavy dose of the sedative again, it might buy us enough time until the deepest part of the night passes. Reinforce it how? He'll need heavy planks and that rifle. You will need to protect the bolt from the outside, Alara. Should I manage to claw it open, you must not hesitate. He looked her straight in the eye, his expression stern. The weight of his expectation, the burden of being the keeper of his darkest secret and his physical restraint was immense. But the fear of running, of being small and powerless again, was now eclipsed by the strange, intoxicating power of protecting him. "I understand," she confirmed, her voice steady. "We have less than 24 hours." They spent the rest of the afternoon and the early evening in a tense, purposeful collaboration. Kael, despite his injury, was astonishingly strong, tearing heavy planks from the unused back shed and using her few tools to brace the storm cellar door from the inside, creating a double locking mechanism. Alara watched him work, fascinated by the efficient, feral grace of his movements, a living embodiment of untamed nature and disciplined power. As the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley, Kael finally stopped. They sat together by the roaring fire, sharing a simple meal of stew, the groceries she had brought back ignored until now. The silence was thick with anticipation. "Why did they call you the Black Alpha?" she asked quietly. Kael took a slow breath. "It's the color and the bloodline. My lineage is old. We are the keepers of the boundaries, the ones who enforce the ancient laws. That power, the darkness, it draws unwanted attention and unwanted reverence." He met her eyes. "It also makes the rejection inevitable." "Rejection?" "The bond. It is fated, yes, but it is not always accepted. Not by my kind. The other packs fear the black blood. I was told my whole life I would be alone, that any bond would be rejected and eventually corrupted. And those beliefs shape reality." He looked away again, his voice dropping to a raw murmur. "I am the Alpha who walks alone." Alara didn't know how to respond to such ancient, profound sorrow. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his, a purely empathetic gesture. This time, he didn't pull away. He turned his hand and gripped hers tightly, his thumb rubbing small, rough circles on her skin. It was an anchor in the coming storm, a quiet agreement between two broken souls to face the impossible together. "Tomorrow night, Alara," he warned, his amber gaze intensely serious. "Tomorrow night you will see what I truly am, and you must be ready to leave if the hunters or the shift breaks through." "I'll be ready," she promised, tightening her grip on his hand, ready to face the magic and the madness of the moon. The day of the full moon was unnervingly quiet, a heavy gray ceiling of clouds pressed down on the mountains, filtering the sunlight into a weak metallic glow. Inside the cabin, the tension was a taut wire, humming with Kael's growing anxiety. The wound on his side, while still visible, was significantly smaller and cleaner than it had been 24 hours ago, a testament to his unnatural healing. But the pain wasn't gone. It had simply morphed into a restless internal agitation. Kael spent the morning pacing, his movements swift and silent, like a shadow moving across the floorboards. He avoided prolonged eye contact, consumed by a fierce internal battle. His focus was entirely on the cellar door, which was now reinforced with thick wooden planks secured by heavy bolts Alara found in a rusty tin. Alara tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, making strong coffee and offering him food. He refused the coffee, but ate the food with a desperate, hurried hunger that bordered on savage, his hands gripping the fork with painful intensity. Around noon, he stopped pacing and turned to her, his amber eyes clouded with a dark resignation. "We need to talk about the silver," he stated, his voice tight, "before it's too late." Alara set down her mug. This was the core secret, the truth he had guarded so fiercely. "Tell me." "That cuff you saw," he began, gesturing vaguely towards the porch, "was not just jewelry. It's an anchoring focus. It's forged from a rare, cursed silver alloy that counters the inherent aggression of the shift. It was worn by all Black Alphas as a promise of restraint, a token that we would never let the wolf become purely feral." He ran his hand roughly over his face. "When I was injured, the rival Alpha used a spike forged from the same metal. It wasn't meant to kill, but to incapacitate and disrupt the balance. It broke the connection to the physical cuff, allowing the wild instinct to surge prematurely. That's why I was so out of control when I shifted back to wolf form and nearly bled out on your porch." "And you don't have it now?" "No. It's lost in the snow, or perhaps destroyed." Kael walked to the fireplace, leaning his powerful forearms against the mantel, staring into the flickering flames as if searching for answers in the heat. Without that anchor, the transition tonight will be violent, untamed. The wolf will be guided by primal needs, survival, territory, and most dangerous of all, the newly formed tether to you. The implication hung heavy in the air. The tethering he'd mentioned was not merely romantic, it was a fundamental physical aspect of his shifting nature. "You mean the bond will be uncontrolled?" she asked, her voice hushed. "It will be absolute," he confirmed, his voice barely a rasp. "The untamed wolf will recognize you as the center of its world, its protector, its territory, its mate. The primal instinct will be to keep you safe, yes, but also to possess you, completely. It won't be the Kael you know, it will be the monster they fear." Alara rose and walked toward him, placing a hand gently on his hard muscle of the back. "I don't believe you're a monster, Kael." He shrugged her hand off, turning to face her with a look of agony. "You haven't seen the change, Alara, not yet. The pain is agonizing, and the consciousness, it fractures. I can feel the wolf clawing its way out, desperate to take control, and tonight, with no anchor, it will be hungry." "Then we have to secure that cellar better," she insisted, turning practical. "We'll use rope, chains, anything." "No," Kael interrupted sharply. "We use what is here, but you must understand the stakes. When I'm in that cellar, locked, you have to be ready to sacrifice me to save yourself. If the hunters arrive, if they try to breach the cabin, you tell them I am gone. You let them track the blood. But if they find the cellar, Alara, you must not let me out. If they kill me while I'm shifted and restrained, you are safe. If I get out, you are in danger. Do you understand? You must protect yourself." The weight of his expectation, the burden of being the keeper of his darkest secret and his physical restraint was immense, but the fear of running, of being small and powerless again, was now eclipsed by the strange, intoxicating power of protecting him. "I understand," she confirmed, her voice steady. "I won't let you be killed." He searched her eyes for a long, agonizing moment, then gave a soft, shuddering sigh of acceptance. His control broke. He lowered his head, not to kiss her in a gentle, slow burn fashion, but to claim her in a sudden, desperate crash of emotion. His mouth found hers, hard and urgent, full of the fear, pain, and overwhelming primal need he had been suppressing for days. It was a kiss of confession, of destiny embraced, a sealing of the reckless promise they had just made. The taste of him was wild, elemental, and utterly consuming. Alana clung to him, her hands threading into his thick, dark hair. It was more than passion. It was a desperate, mutual recognition of two souls that had finding a dangerous, impossible completeness in the deep, cold isolation of the mountain. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of an engine, a low, grinding noise fighting its way up the mountain track. Kael pulled back instantly, his senses on high alert. His eyes were wide, the amber now blazing with feral fury. "They're early," he snarled, a low, savage sound that was distinctly wolf. The fever was rising, the shift was beginning. He grabbed her arm, his grip crushing. "Now, Alara, now. Lock me down, don't hesitate. Whatever happens, don't let me out." He shoved her toward the kitchen, his body already trembling violently. She watched in horror as his skin began to stretch, his bones audibly cracking and grinding as he forced himself towards the storm cellar door. The secret was unveiled, the danger was upon them, the time for trust was over, the time for survival had begun. Alara scrambled toward the heavy rifle, her mind racing. She had 1 hour, maybe less, before the full moon and the hunters arrived, and she had a magnificent, terrifying black Alpha to lock away and protect. The distant rumble of the engine grew closer, a sound of mechanized menace slicing through the sudden, unnatural silence that had fallen over the mountain. The atmosphere inside the cabin was electric, charged with Kael's agonizing transformation. Alara flew across the room, seizing the edge of the rug and tearing it back to reveal the heavy, trapdoor-like entrance to the storm cellar. Kael was already on his knees, his hands, which were visibly thickening, the bone structure shifting, fumbling with the latch. "Hurry, Alara," he gasped, his voice shredded by the internal pressure of the change. A low, agonizing moan vibrated in his chest. His eyes, fixed on her, were filled with a desperate combination of pain and primal fear. Alara didn't hesitate. She threw open the wooden door, revealing a small, damp, dirt-floored chamber below. The air was cold and musty. Kael shoved himself into the opening, his large frame scraping painfully against the edges. The process of his shift was accelerating. As he dropped into the cellar, she watched in horror as thick, coarse black fur began to sprout rapidly across his shoulders and chest, tearing the canvas jacket. His spine arced violently, and a guttural, inhuman roar ripped from his throat, silencing the incoming engine noise for a terrifying moment. He was already too large for the cramped space. He barely had time to brace the inner wooden plank across the frame before the transformation seized him completely. "The bolt, lock it." Kael's final, human command was a strained whisper of air and fury. Alara slammed the heavy door down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Her fingers, trembling violently, grabbed the thick, rusty metal slide bolt. She shoved it into place with a frantic, metallic scrape. A monumental thud immediately followed from below, the sound of the fully shifted black Alpha hitting the interior of the door, testing its strength. The heavy wood groaned, and dust motes rained down from the cracks. Alara didn't stop. She grabbed the 2x4s Kael had prepared and began securing the external bracing, frantically jamming them against the door and screwing them into the floor with a handheld drill. Every scrape of the drill was punctuated by the terrifying, deafening sounds from the cellar. Deep, frustrated snarls, the heavy thump of a massive body, and the sickening sound of wood splintering beneath superhuman force. She worked in a cold sweat, her breath coming in ragged gasps, knowing that if she failed, she would be facing the untamed full power of the Black Alpha, now utterly stripped of Kael's control and driven by the raw, consuming needs of the wolf. Territory, protection, mate. The words echoed with a predatory weight in her mind. Just as she finished securing the final plank, the heavy wood now holding fast against the terrifying pressure, the truck reached the clearing. Headlights sliced through the gloom, illuminating the front of the cabin. Alara dropped the drill and scrambled for the rifle, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drum. She was trapped between two inevitable dangers, the enraged creature beneath her feet and the armed hunters at her door. She ran to the window, peering out. 3 men, bulky in dark, heavy winter gear, emerged from the pickup. They carried high-towered rifles and moved with a grim, practiced efficiency that spoke volumes about their experience. They were hunters, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. One of the men, lean and cold-eyed, stepped forward and knocked sharply on the cabin door. Alara raised the rifle, steadying the weight. Her hands were still shaking, but a strange, icy calm had settled over her. She was no longer running from life. She was fighting for the fate of another soul. She opened the door just a crack, letting the cold air rush in. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice surprisingly level. The lead hunter, whose face was weathered and hard, gave her a dismissive once-over. "We're searching for an injured trespasser, ma'am, a fugitive. We have reason to believe he crossed this property." "I'm sorry, but I haven't seen anyone," Alara lied easily, keeping her body angled to block the view of the living room, specifically the braced cellar door. "I just arrived a few days ago, and the storm kept me isolated. I've only seen a massive black wolf. I think it was wounded." The hunter's eyes narrowed slightly. "A black wolf, you say? Where did it go?" "It was badly hurt. I tried to help it, but it was aggressive. It ran off into the woods toward the West Ridge this morning, probably trying to get away from the lights and noise." She injected just the right amount of fear and sincerity into her voice. Betrayal or sacrifice? She was choosing to sacrifice her own safety to protect Kael.
The hunters exchanged a glance with their companions. Alara knew she had to convince them to leave before Kael's fury beneath the floor became loud enough to hear over the wind. The muffled growls were already vibrating through the floorboards. "We'll need to check the cabin, ma'am. Search warrant protocols." "Absolutely not," Alara said sharply, resting the barrel of the rifle on the doorframe. "You are on private property. You have no warrant. You have no right. You are trespassing. I told you what I saw. Now you need to leave." Her sudden, fierce confidence seemed to momentarily throw the hunters off balance. They were clearly expecting a frightened, isolated woman to comply. "The fugitive we're tracking is dangerous," the hunter insisted. "He's a threat to everyone in the area." "I'm the only one in the area, and I feel more threatened by 3 armed men demanding entry to my rental than I ever did by a wounded animal." She gave them a cold smile, the kind born of weeks of suppressed fury at her own betrayal. "You have 10 seconds to get back in your truck before I call the only person who has a working signal for miles, my landlord, who is the local sheriff." Another lie, but one she hoped carried weight. The hunter hesitated, eyeing the rifle. They were clearly disciplined men who understood the limits of the law, even if they were pursuing something supernatural. "We'll track the trail you mentioned," the hunter finally conceded, his voice hard. "But if we find evidence you lied, we'll be back, and it won't be politely." He spun around, signaling his men. They gathered their gear, their eyes lingering suspiciously on the dark cabin, and moved into the trees on the west side, toward the direction Alara had indicated. The truck's engine rumbled away into the distance. Alara waited until the sound of the engine was completely gone before she slammed the door shut and slid the internal bolt. She leaned against the door, trembling, the cold veneer of control shattering. The threat from the outside was gone, but the threat from the inside was intensifying. The noise from the cellar had become a continuous, savage assault. The splintering of wood was louder now, punctuated by an explosive roar that shook the very foundations of the cabin. She could hear the heavy, desperate claws of the creature scratching and tearing at the wood beneath her feet. She scrambled back to the kitchen, dropping to her knees, placing her ear against the floor. "Kael, urgently! They're gone! They believed me! You're safe!" For a moment, the noise ceased, and then a sound that chilled her to the bone. Not a roar, but a low, ragged moan of pure, agonizing consciousness. A sound that contained the deep, terrifying sorrow of the man trapped inside the beast. He'd heard her. He was fighting the wolf. But then the frenzy began anew, tenfold. The braced wood began to protest, cracking loudly. The cellar door visibly bucked beneath the sheer, impossible force of the Black Alpha. Alara realized that the hunters had been merely a momentary diversion. The true threat was the full moon, now surely peeking in the cloud cover, and the uncontrolled, primal nature of the bond she had sealed with her kiss. She had faced the external danger and won. Now she had to face the internal storm. She knew she couldn't rely on the flimsy wood for long. She picked up the discarded rifle, her hands steady now. "If I get out, you are in danger. You must protect yourself." She looked down at the violently shuddering floor. Kael had asked her to sacrifice him, but she had promised to stay. Now she had to choose between his final, self-sacrificing command and the powerful, illogical conviction that their fated bond was meant to heal, not to destroy. The sound of the final, massive supporting planks snapping below her was the only answer she needed. She stood over the cellar, the heavy rifle held tight, preparing for the emotional breakthrough, the life-threatening event that would either save them both or end them. The floorboards groaned, the sounds beneath no longer mere thuds, but a sustained, terrifying assault of immense strength and desperation. The thick, reinforced door was flexing, its wood visibly splitting under the pressure. The Black Alpha was enraged.
The moment they left the sanctuary of the cabin felt heavy with risk. They drove Alara's sedan deep into the surrounding national forest, far off the main track, and Kael meticulously covered the vehicle with brush and pine boughs, concealing it from any aerial or ground surveillance. The transition to a clandestine existence was seamless for Kael. For Alara, it was a terrifying crash course. She watched him move, silent, hyper-aware, constantly sniffing the air and scanning the tree lines. He was the wolf even when he was in his human skin, alert to every shift in the wind, every snap of a twig. They set off on foot, carrying only the most essential supplies and the rifle. Kael led her expertly through the dense forest, moving with a tireless, easy stride that Alara struggled to match. The path was challenging, but the constant proximity, the need for mutual reliance, deepened their emotional bond far more quickly than weeks of comfortable dating ever could. Mid-afternoon, they reached a hidden gravel logging road that Kael had mentioned. As they walked, Alara brought up the inevitable confrontation. "You said the other Alpha wants to claim the territory and punish you for breaking the law. What exactly does punish mean for a Black Alpha?" Kael stopped, his profile grim beneath the darkening sky. "The Black Alpha holds power that the others fear. If I am found wounded and corrupted by a human bond, they will call a challenge, not just for the territory, but for the bloodline. It is a fight to the death, and the victor claims all. If the rival wins, he claims my territory and breaks the bond with you, likely lethally, for both of us." The brutal finality of the challenge settled around them like the rising cold. "But what if we just disappear? If we get to your cache and travel deep into the wilderness?" "The fated bond is a beacon, Alara, especially an uncontrolled one like ours. My rival will smell you on me now that the full moon has passed and the bond has sealed. They will hunt us relentlessly until they find us. We cannot hide forever. We must choose our battlefield." He turned to her, his amber eyes blazing with fierce determination. "I will not run from a challenge, Alara. I will not let them judge you from my choices. We will lead them to a place of our choosing, and I will meet the rival Alpha on my own ground. But first, we need to get to the cache." They walked on for another 2 hours, the emotional weight of the impending battle heavy in the air, before Kael suddenly pulled her sharply behind a massive cluster of rocks. "Quiet," he commanded, his body instantly tense, all traces of the gentle man gone, replaced by the poised predator. Alara froze, listening intently. She heard nothing, but Kael's senses were far superior. "They're behind us, not the hunters, shifters. 3 of them," he whispered, his eyes narrowed, staring back down the road they had just traveled. "They're moving too fast to be scouts. They are closing in." The final challenge was not waiting for them in Montana. It was here, now in the dense, freezing woods. Kael pushed her against the rock face, shielding her with his body. He pulled a long, gleaming silver knife from a sheath hidden beneath his jacket, a blade etched with the same swirling, ancient symbols as the lost cuff. "This is it, Alara. I have to draw them away from you. I will lead them deep into the gorge. You go straight for 2 miles. You will find a small, abandoned ranger outpost. Wait there. Do not come out until I find you." "I won't leave you," Alara protested, gripping his arm desperately. "You must," he snarled, the command absolute. "The tether is stronger now. The sight of you will be my weakness. If you are safe, I can fight without restraint. If you are here, I will be defending you, not winning the challenge." His words, born of raw, necessary sacrifice, pierced her heart. She was the anchor, but in battle, the anchor was a liability. He leaned in, his kiss quick and intense, a burning promise of return. "I am coming back for you. Stay hidden. Trust my scent." Before she could speak, he broke away, moving with shocking speed and silence. He vanished into the underbrush, drawing the shifters towards the gorge, leaving Alara utterly alone in the crushing cold, the sound of his receding footsteps marking the start of his final, desperate battle. Alara stood paralyzed for a moment, listening to the forest swallow the man she loved, then hearing the faint, distant sounds of 3 powerful figures closing in. She tightened her grip on the rifle and ran in the opposite direction, towards the small, isolated ranger outpost, praying she could survive long enough for Kael to win his fight. Alara ran on pure adrenaline, the sound of Kael drawing the pursuing shifters away fading quickly behind her. The knowledge that he was facing 3 hostiles, wounded and alone, filled her with a terrifying mixture of helplessness and fierce, desperate hope. She ran until her lungs burned, and the world blurred into a wash of gray trunks and white snow, driven by the absolute certainty that she had to survive for him. She found the abandoned ranger outpost exactly where Kael had described it, a small, sturdy wooden cabin, half hidden by overgrown pines, with a thick, iron-reinforced door. She burst inside, slamming the door shut and securing the heavy slide lock. The cabin was cold, musty, and offered the illusion of safety, but it was solid. She sank onto the cold floor, the rifle clattering beside her, and focused all her energy on listening. The forest was silent, a profound, watchful silence that was more terrifying than the noise of the chase. She strained to perceive the battle, trying to feel the tether Kael had spoken of, the deep connection that bound them. At first, there was only static, the frantic beating of her own heart. Then she felt it, a sudden, sharp spike of agony, a psychic scream that was raw, agonizing, and distinctly Kael's. It was followed by the crash of breaking wood and a guttural, terrifying chorus of snarls, three distinct, hungry voices against one roar of black, desperate fury. Ilara gasped, clutching her chest. The pain was secondary. The overwhelming feeling was a raw, searing determination, Kael's will, fighting for survival and for her. She couldn't stay put. The thought of him fighting alone, of the tether being violently severed, was intolerable. She grabbed the rifle. She knew nothing about fighting shifters, but she couldn't hide while he faced death. As she reached the door, another wave of psychic energy slammed into her. Not pain this time, but a confusing blast of primal rage and a flash of pure, black-furred, lethal force. The surge was overwhelming, immediately followed by the distinct sound of two sharp, final snaps, and then silence. A deep, bone-vibrating, territorial howl tore through the forest of quiet. It was the sound of victory, of claim, and absolute power. It was the voice of the Black Alpha, raw and triumphant. Tears streamed down Ilara's face, a rush of relief so potent it nearly incapacitated her. It had won. She threw open the door, ignoring the cold, and ran towards the direction of the sound, racing back toward the gorge. She found him just off the old logging road. It was not the man she had kissed who stood there, but the magnificent creature of her nightmares and her salvation, the Black Alpha, immense and terrifying. He was standing over the bodies of three other wolves, lighter in color, smaller, broken, and still in the snow. The Black Alpha's fur was matted with blood, but the deep wound on his side was already weeping only clear fluid, his healing accelerated by the adrenaline of the fight. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with titanic effort, the epitome of raw, untamed power. As Ilara approached, he didn't move. He simply turned his massive head, his amber eyes locking onto her. The territorial aggression of the moment was still thick in the air, but the recognition was immediate and absolute. The primal rage in his gaze softened, giving way to the deep, possessive fire that was Kael. She walked straight to him, dropping the rifle again. She didn't speak. She simply reached out and wrapped her arms around his massive neck, burying her face in the thick, pungent fur. The great beast let out a low, grumbling sound that traveled through her entire body, a mix of warning, acceptance, and a deep, satisfied purr. They stood there for a long moment, the human woman clinging to the victorious Alpha, the silent promise of their bond sealing their new reality. The resolution had not come from breaking a curse, but from embracing a terrifying truth. Finally, the wolf gently pushed her away with its muzzle and began to back away towards a shadowed cluster of trees. Ilara knew what was happening. The high of the battle had passed, and the painful transition back to his human form was beginning. She turned her back, offering him the privacy and protection he needed. She waited, listening to the strained sounds of his body restructuring, the heavy, ragged breathing that signaled the final painful stages of his shift. When she finally heard a low, familiar voice, she turned. Kael was standing there, leaning heavily against the tree, exhausted, naked, and covered in sweat, but completely human.
The small residual wounds from the fight were already fading. "You came back," he rasped, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "I promised," she said simply, walking toward him, wrapping the blanket she'd brought around his shoulders. He pulled her into a tight, grateful embrace, his strength quickly returning. "The challenge is over. I claimed the victory. My blood has reinforced the ancient